For the benefit of some of our viewers that may be just tuning in, tell us a little bit about who is Dr. Ben Carson.
Well, first of all, I'm a director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, a professor in multiple disciplines. But I started out as a little kid in Detroit, growing up in a single-parent home, dire poverty, pathological temper, poor self-esteem, all the markers of failure. Certainly an at-risk young person. But, you know, there were a number of things that happened during my life which I think precluded the failure that one would have predicted. Not the least of which was my mother, who was one of 24 children, got married when she was 13, moved from rural Tennessee to Detroit with my father. She discovered after a couple of years that he was a bigamist, had another family. That obviously was very traumatic. We moved to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Typical tenement, large multifamily dwellings, boarded up windows and doors, sirens, gangs, murders. Both of my older cousins were killed. Wow. It was that kind of environment. And she was working as a domestic, cleaning other people's houses. She didn't want to be on welfare because she had noticed that she never saw anybody go on welfare and come off of it. And she didn't want her life to be controlled in that way. After a couple of years, we were able to move back to Detroit, still in a multifamily dwelling with significant wildlife, but nevertheless,
significant wildlife.
she was independent. I was a horrendous student. I just didn't seem to understand anything. And you know, it was that time where the transition began to occur because, you know, my mother knew that she had to work low-paying jobs because she didn't have the advantage of an education. She saw me going down the same road, my brother going down the same road, and she prayed and asked God to give her the wisdom to know what to do to get her young sons to develop themselves intellectually so they could control their own lives. And God gave her the ideal of turning off the TV, letting us watch only 2 or 3 TV programs during the week, and with all that spare time, read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library, submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she would put little check marks and underline and highlight and stuff. But, you know, it made a profound difference. And in the beginning, I thought it was horrible. I thought
yes, I can imagine.
I thought it was child abuse, but it didn't take long before you know, I couldn't wait to get home and open those books because we lived in a pretty horrendous environment, but between the covers of those books I could go anywhere, I could be anybody, I could do anything. I began to imagine myself, you know, creating new chemicals and discovering new galaxies and microcosms, and I began to know things that nobody else knew, and I went from the bottom of my class to the top of the class in a year and a half.
My goodness.
And, you know, it just tremendously changed my life. Of course, I then had a horrendous temper problem as well. And it was only through the grace of God that I was able to handle that problem and realize that, you know, temper and anger issues primarily surround people who are self-centered because they're always thinking about, how does that impact me? Why is that person in my space? Why did they do that to hurt me? And once you learn to step outside of the center of the equation and to be able to look in from the outside, it's very difficult for people to make you angry. And you have a much better perspective. And fortunately, you know, I was able to gain that before I ended up in jail or reform school or the grave. So, and then, you know, from there I went on, had a very, very rapid career, and ended up as chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins by the time I was 33.
My goodness.